Cool. So thanks for joining everyone for our fourth show and tell. We're going to be sharing a couple of themes that we've spotted through to do with community connectedness and we're finding out so far, and things we'd like to kind of think about moving forward as well. So just as a recap, in case you're new here or you haven't been in a little while, so this is our team. So we've got Erin as delivery manager. I'm the service designer on this particular piece of work. And Monica and Bethan are our innovation officers. Both Erin and Monica are away today, so it's a smaller show and tell. And Bethan is our innovation officer in Neath. Excitingly, we also have 2 new roles coming up in Nelson and Camborne in Cornwall as well. So I'll fill in some more information about that at the end. Again, just as a reminder, I mentioned at the beginning, but this is a conversation. So we're going to share some of the stuff that we've learned, but also it would be great to hear from you guys on any thoughts or questions you have for us as well, to kind of probe our thoughts as we move forward. And as a recap on what we're doing, so at the moment we're in the discovery phase, and our goal for this discovery is to engage and understand the strengths and needs of communities in high risk, low resource places. So we're really keen on assets and a strengths-based approach, understanding more about what's already in the community and building on that, and also understanding more about the needs to kind of, move that forward. Really sorry to interrupt. Kat Howard-Smith is struggling to get in. Don't know how to resolve that. Jess, you have my full invite. Would you be able to copy and send it to her? Okay, thank you so much. Cool. So and where are we doing this discovery? So we've got 3 locations that we're tackling this work in. So Nelson in Lancashire, Neath in South Wales, and Camborne in Cornwall. So we've already started our work in Neath and Nelson, and Camborne will be kicking off in the new year, which is really exciting. And as I said, we're in the discovery phase at the moment. So we're learning at the moment with the communities, and we'll be carrying this through till the new year before we start looking at what we can start testing and exploring with the communities, and maybe look at what we can start implementing as well. So what have we done so far? So far we have done 25 interviews in Neath and 17 in Nelson. And as you can see from the list on the screen, there's a whole wide range of people we've been speaking to. That's only a snapshot as well. We've really explored to make sure we're getting a really wide range of perspectives from all walks of life and understanding holistically what the community looks like to people who live in it. And how we've found these people through a kind of a cascade recruitment approach. So we've found a couple of people, and through the interviews we've been listening to and understanding from, we've either looked at things we want to explore more from things that have been flagged to us, but also people have passed on contacts of people they think that'd be great for us to explore things through, which has been a really natural and helpful way of getting to understand and explore the community that maybe we wouldn't have been able to do just from maybe looking online to start with. We've also been using an agency, which I'm not sure many people are aware of. So what's great about an agency is it's really unbiased. So the great thing about the cascade approach, as I mentioned, it's really natural, but we're getting the contacts from people who are already in our research. So the digital divide, so this means we can get individuals we may not have had access to before, and spread our understanding more about the community. It's also helping us bridge that digital divide. Obviously, we're not able to be in the locations at the moment, so helping us find individuals who maybe we couldn't find through online searching or through Facebook groups. And the last thing is time. Recruitment takes a lot of time, so we've really valued the time saved by having the agency help us recruit a few individuals to research as well. So on to the more exciting stuff. What we've been doing, what we learned. So we've started mapping out some of the community. Don't worry about reading all these post-its. Just wanted to kind of show you a little bit about how we're pulling a few things together. And we want to talk about some of the themes we've been exploring. So what's really clear is that depending on how connected you are to the community, you can get a really different experience of the same place. So the first thing is that being connected and valued within support networks really brings awareness and optimism. There's a lot of levels to this. So what we found is speaking to the people who are either maybe because of their jobs involved in services or groups, for example, maybe local area coordinators or council members, but even on a smaller level, people who've maybe started community initiatives. They seem to tell us there were so many different things happening in Neath. Someone said there's something for everyone. There's so much happening. And this is both in Neath and Nelson. And that kind of brought us real air of optimism about there's hope for the future, because all these people are working together to create some positivity and support the local community. A really lovely quote that we got from someone in Nelson was that, "I'm not religious, but someone always provides. What goes around comes around if you share." And it's clear that when people feel like they're connected into these spaces, even though they may be not as full of resources in their personal life, they felt like they had these support networks they could rely on in times of need, or even just in everyday life, maybe not when it's such an extreme times of need. And what was also interesting is that once you're in these communities, you know more about them. So we spoke to a GP, a psychologist who works into a GP surgery, and she was saying that the way she found out who to refer people to is speaking to one person who speaks to three others, who speaks to three others. And that's how she found out more what's going on. Similar to a cascade approach, but there was no like clear way that was happening without those conversations. And equally, we spoke to a lady who runs a food cooperative, and she was saying that now people come to her because they know her. There's one point of call is the food cooperative. They come to her for everything. She's running music events, she's running everything, because people say like, now I know where to come to. I'm really engaged in my community. But there's also the opposite there. If you don't know, you really don't know what's going on in the community. So if you haven't got those places to go to, those places you feel valued, or that you, even just the connections you know you can rely on, it's very hard to know where to start. And that can really lead to a kind of a feeling of no hope that we've been picking up in both locations really so far. It seems that most people communicate via word of mouth, and kind of you ask people you like or you trust, and trust is a really key point in this, of where to go for support. We had a gentleman who is currently experiencing universal credit, and when asking him what it was that brought him onto that level of cash assistance rather than any other program, he said it was because his sister told him. His sister told him where to go. And that's why he trusted her opinion and knew where to go for that support. And from that, and that was really interesting to us to understand that it is these trusted connections that if aren't there, that then you don't really understand or know what services are available to you, what support's available to you, and how you can better interact with your community in a way that works with you. As you can see on the right-hand side, this is one of our replies from some of our culture boxes. And when asked what more people could want from their community, they said they just wanted introductions to local groups to bridge that understanding of what's out there and who they can get involved with. And someone said, I'm not sure where people would go without those community contacts. And that leads us really interestingly onto this point, which is that what we traditionally thought would be our most vulnerable through maybe thinking about like even just through our three causes, that's really changed through COVID. And what people are experiencing because of that has changed. We had an interview with a lady who really expressed some concern with the free school meal program, because she said that the free school meal program is great if you're eligible for it. But there's a whole lost group of people there who maybe before COVID had no need for services in this way. But now her child has had to take multiple weeks off school due to being in a COVID exposed environment, which her employer is unable to cover with sick pay. So that leaves her in a place where she's had a month without any income to be able to put those meals on the table. And she said, so what gap do I fall into? Where do I fit into this space? And how do I move forward? Because the most vulnerable maybe weren't who they were before. And what's interesting about that, linking it to the networks, is that if you were maybe previously vulnerable or accessing services or groups before COVID, then maybe you know where to turn to. You know the first person to ask that question to. But if you've never had to access those supports before, then who are you turning to now? Who's able to support you? And where do you go as that trusted voice? And it's that trusted voice that seems to be coming through really strongly as what we've got through a whole range of people. People have gone to people they know or people they see as respected, whether that's a GP or the council or otherwise. And that's something we're kind of, it's been really poignant for us, and understanding more about how people want to work. And that's led us to a couple of questions I'd love to kind of share with you and also hear your thoughts on. So the first is, how are the groups that are currently there and organizations communicating locally? How are they engaging people? Is it very natural, or are they reaching out? We've heard a little bit, but we'd love to explore this a little bit more. The next is, what makes that trusted voice? What makes someone or an organization the person that people turn to when they need to ask that question in a way that they feel they can openly and vulnerably ask it, rather than maybe hiding what they were, or less sure about where they wanted to how much they wanted to share. And how does community connectedness turn into hope and action? This is a really interesting one for us, because we've seen lots of community groups coming together. They've taken that leap and said, we're not just going to be our group together, we're going to reach out and we're going to be part of something bigger. And what triggers that? What are the key things in there? Again, we have a couple of hypotheses, but it's definitely something we really want to dive into further. And last but not least, what empowers people to improve their local environment? So what takes that feeling of frustration or feeling of no hope or seeing an issue in your local area and wanting to turn that into into something that you want to build for your local environment? And are there any barriers to this? Is something getting in the way of that action? That's just a couple of the questions that kind of link to things we've spoken about today. So I kind of wanted to open it up to everyone else now. Are there any thoughts or questions of things that you has jumped out from that?
I'm going to ask a question. It seems like you're finding common trends in both Neath and Nelson. Are there any things that you found really specific to those regional locations yet? Or are the themes actually merging quite well together? I'd just be interested to see if there's maybe something really specific about Neath or something really specific about Nelson that kind of stood out to you around the community.
Yeah, for sure. So what's interesting is the challenges being faced in both are quite similar, in the fact that a lot of people have brought up drug abuse, have the lack of youth services, or even conversations around like which services are missing and those kind of spaces. But the parallels are in Neath, there already seems to be, that before COVID especially, there seemed to already be quite a strong community presence themselves. So people were already quite integrated, and that was maximized during COVID. So they built on that and they built action, and they've kind of come together as a community with street champion schemes and all that sort of stuff, which is built on that and made people feel a lot more connected to their community and a lot more positive about what can move forward. And it seems like that was lacking a bit in Nelson, because what's interesting, and we haven't touched on so much in show and tells, is that there is a lot more, there's a quite a divided community in Nelson. So there is a large Asian community, which maybe hasn't integrated as much with the white community, and there's a lot of organizations that are kind of tackling that and building on social cohesion. And it seems like those fractions have created like micro communities that aren't communicating with each other as much. So building that communication channel seems to be something that could be really maximized, which is already happening in Neath. So whilst the challenges are similar, and there was the both sides of things of like either more optimistic and less so in both towns, I think there's a much more optimism in Neath than is in Nelson. And I think from the work we've been doing, we've been discussing that we think that's due to like existing community bonds that are already going.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that as well? I think one thing we've discovered as well with Nelson, obviously there's that divide, but there's also a language barrier as well, which has come through quite strongly, is that you've got your strong Asian community and your strong English community as they describe it. And there's a lack of communication between them both because of the language barrier as well.
Absolutely. Hannah, I got your comment. Are these communities that have current or historic BRC presence? So what we've done is we've actually picked 3 communities which have different levels for that exact reason. We want to explore the differences in that. So in Nelson, there is no Red Cross presence, and there hasn't really ever been one of note. In Neath, it's very contractual. So there has previously been a lot of Red Cross services and Red Cross offices, but because they were done very much on a contractual basis, they've all recently ended. So it's interesting for us to explore what was there and kind of what's left now. And in Cornwall, it's actually the base of a number of our services. So the MAS warehouse is there. That's where the emergency response vehicle is, and we have a community connector program. So we're quite interested to explore the 3 different regions and how they all respond differently. Things as well. I hope that answers your question. Matt, what surprises about your findings so far? Good question. I think what caught us off guard initially is, so in Neath, people were very forthcoming with information. People were really open and exploring the good and the bad of what they thought of their community. And in Nelson, our first few interviews were very different, and people kind of hinted there were challenges, but didn't really want to explore that further with us. And we've spoken to a couple of people in the local area that we are more connected to, and we explore that more. And that's kind of where a lot of these insights came from this show and tell, because it seems to be that when people feel connected with their community and they feel empowered to do something in their community, they were more willing to share and more open about those things. And I think what's also surprised us and kind of made us think a bit differently about how we're tackling things is that we could literally have an interview in the morning of someone telling us how incredible their town and place was, and how it has everything for everyone. And there was, in fact, it almost sounded utopian, frankly. Sometimes people were like, there's something for everyone. There's really no problems here. And then we could have an interview in the afternoon and someone tells us it's completely the opposite. We've heard the quote, "There is no hope," more times than I think we were expecting. And that's what's made us dive into kind of why there are two levels and what causes that to be in such a small area. These aren't like cities, these are relatively small towns. So what causes that divide? And I think that's what's kind of surprised us at the moment. Andrew, for Neath, have you settled on the boundaries for where you're working, for example? Yes. So we're very much trying to keep it, as we've said it since the kind of the start of our research, because we're trying to look at an area to start with, we're looking to understand communities. We had to stord somewhere. So we started with saying Neath. And it's the same in Nelson. You've got Nelson, Barretford, Briarfield, and there's a couple of other things like that. What we're trying to connect with is people who feel like Neath would be where they would say they're from or where they connect with. So we understand that equally in Neath, people were saying, well, I'm definitely from Cadoxton, or I'm definitely from Britton Ferry. And that's kind of, we're trying not to be exclusive, but we're also not just like kind of spreading and spreading and spreading. We've tried to get people who are like, would say that they come to Neath or they've engaged with Neath, or if you ask them where they're from, they'll probably say Neath, and literally not the full Swansea Valley, because we have to start somewhere we can actually build our research and work out from, if that makes sense. No worries, Henry.
Charlotte, there were some interesting questions on the previous slide. Would you be able to go back so we can have a wee look at those?
Yeah, no worries.
I guess one of the things that struck me was you saying that if you don't know, you really don't know. And you know, the bottom question there about what empowers people to improve your local environment and what are the barriers, kind of just people not knowing, and how do you empower local people to have a voice, I suppose, is part of that, isn't it?
100%. And those are the kind of things we've been kind of seen as so stark, really, that someone could, because we have a discussion guide that we kind of explore things through in a really open way, and people come forth with different pieces of information. But also, as we started to build a picture, we were able to offer different prompts and different questions. What we kind of had heard from some people, there was loads of services that made us more interested to kind of be like, interestingly, what services, what's in your local area? And it really is that stark. People either know and can tell you there's 5 different places you can go and call these different numbers and you can speak to that person, or they're literally like, there is nothing here. We ask at one point, how do you feel your community helps within your community? Like, do you see people helping each other at like either a local or a hyper local street level, or even as a whole community? And some people like gush with joy about like, amazing, yeah, we have this scheme and we have this, and that kind of food cooperative I mentioned, it was so awesome to hear about. It's not a food bank. You pay £3 and you come every Thursday and you can get your groceries, but it's a community. They have dinner and supper clubs. They have all this stuff, and people feel empowered to be like part of this space. And she was like, we get people who, they all of her volunteers have underlying health conditions, and some also have learning difficulties, and they're all completely empowered to run this center together. And she was like telling me how amazing it is, and I was like, wow, I want to be part of it. And then we have this next interview, and someone tells us that they want to move out of Nelson as soon as they can, but they can't afford to, and they hate it there, and there's nothing for them, and it's just dire. And yeah, we, like, as I said, the phrase "no hope," And it really hits you when you hear like there is no hope for my area. And I think it's so interesting to explore like what you really don't know. There's no middle ground, it seems. Yeah, I don't know if that kind of builds on anything.
Yeah, it does. I'm just sort of thinking about how do we take the learning about ongoing community engagement, and I don't know if that's sort of part of what you're teasing out through the process.
Yeah, I mean, as I said at the beginning, like these are just a couple of the themes that we've been picking up, and we've really picked up so much. I could be here for an hour talking to you all, but we're not. We're trying to just share it in short, sharp bites. But
oh, sorry, I missed the beginning.
Oh no,
I was struggling to get in.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not sure why Zoom does that sometimes. But I think what's really so yeah, I'd say we're definitely learning at the moment, and there's so many different things and so many different avenues we could be exploring. And that's one of the joys of discovery, is that we can kind of take on all these different bits and work out what is the Red Cross resonates with us, what is something that we can do, and what can we test and implement. So yeah, it's definitely like yeah, the reason why we're sharing this today is because we feel like it's really important, but also there are so many other things we're kind of wanting to build on and continuously learn. We haven't even got to Cornwall yet. We might find we get into Cornwall and we see something completely different. But yeah, it's definitely it's the joy of sharing it with you all today, because and especially these questions at the end, we wanted to kind of see if any of you had any thoughts about any of these questions yourselves, or whether it relates to any of your work as well.
I think the trusted voice piece is really interesting, isn't it? And who do, we've got ideas of what we think makes a trusted voice, but who are the trusted voices that the people you've been speaking to are trusting? And what are the characteristics of a trusted voice will kind of tell us a lot about how we need to work in the future and how we need to partner in the future.
100%. And what's interesting is that I think different people have different trusted voices, and that's what makes it all the more complicated. So as we were saying, like in the Asian community in Nelson, people were kind of saying they didn't really engage with services, didn't really need to, because everything they could possibly need was within their family network. But when they needed something outside of that network, it still came to like asking someone within that direct network to kind of for that cash assistance reference. When they were saying, I don't know if you joined by that point, but this gentleman, when he needed that support during COVID, he turned to his sister, who's told him to go to Universal Credit rather than any other form. We kind of explored that with him. Yeah, and so it's interesting, like, oh, sorry. Oh no, is it just feedback? So I think it's just really interesting to kind of explore the parallels between a trusted voice of someone who already has a really strong support network and someone who doesn't, and also someone who a trusted voice of someone who has previously accessed a lot of services and someone who hasn't. And I think there's a lot of different voices in that space, but yeah, the kind of characteristics is definitely something to dive into and understand more about, where that comes from. Has anyone got any other questions, or I'd love to tell you what we're up to next week otherwise. Cool. So things to know for next week. So we're recruiting. Unfortunately, the gentleman we recruited for Nelson had to change his. He's no longer able to take the role, basically, because he's had a family emergency and needed to handle that. So Nelson is reopened, and so is Cornwall. So we'll be the roles will be open till the 20th of December. So please, if you know anyone in those areas or someone that you think would be interested in working with us, we'd love to hear from them. The particular characteristics we're really interested in are someone with a really like a growth mindset and someone who's really good at engaging with individuals in a community and understanding community dynamics. The week ahead is full of synthesis. We've not really got any interviews next week on purpose, so we can really spend the time looking at what we've learned in the last couple of weeks. And just as a heads up for next week's show and tell, we're going to move them towards 15 minutes. We know that people kind of been inundated with show and tells at the moment, and we want to kind of keep sharing with you in a way that works for you without taking up all of your time. So we're going to kind of, hone it down a little bit more. But that's cool. Is there any final thoughts? As I'm just going to press stop on the recording. No, all good. Let me